We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Discovery puts America back in space. Hello again with the news that the American Space Shuttle Discovery blasted off into orbit just under half an hour ago. The launch was put off for nearly 2 hours because there wasn't enough wind. After the nail-biting wait, NASA officials finally gave the go-ahead for takeoff. It's the first manned flight since the Challenger disaster 32 months ago, and it had been put off many times for extra safety checks. When Discovery finally lifted off, millions of people around the world watching live on television held their breath and let it out again when all went well. Hundreds of thousands of spectators were at Cape Canaveral in Florida to see the launch. The 5 astronauts will spend 4 days in space, landing at Edwards Air Force Base in California on Monday. Newsround space editor Reg Turnhill is at Cape Canaveral, and we're now going to him live by satellite for the latest news. Hello, Reg. How's the flight going?
Hello, Roger. Just about 10 minutes before you went on the air, Space Shuttle Discovery went safely into orbit. And it's amazing. Hundreds of people all around me were in tears. This is a very emotional moment for America because many people thought that if this launch failed, they'd be out of manned spaceflight either for good or for a very long time.
Well, Reg, now let's take a look at that historic launch.
7, 6, start, 3, 2, 1. 0, and liftoff! Liftoff. Americans return to space as Discovery clears the tower.
And now we're approaching the moment when Rick Hawke said they'd all be remembering what happened to Challenger. Their last message from Challenger came at 59 seconds, confirming that all engines had blasted up to full throttle. And everybody here held their breath until Discovery 2 passed that moment of full throttle and passed the moment at 73 seconds when Challenger had blown up. This time, as you see, all went very well, a perfectly smooth liftoff and launch, though we did have some anxious waits for the bad weather conditions. And launch control, incidentally, even had to be careful not to launch while the Soviet space station Mir was passing right overhead.
Mark 1 minute, velocity 23.
Reg, what's the feeling there at the moment, Reg? I mean, people must be very relieved indeed.
The feeling is one of immense relief. People had begun to give up hope with this long wait. Somehow, when it goes perfectly, it goes straight away right on time. Once you begin delays, they seem to go on forever and the whole thing lead to an abort. But this time, all is well.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Reg. And we're hoping to go back to Reg Turnhill for the latest on the shuttle at the end of the programme. Now for the rest of today's news. Reg, how's the flight going?
The flight is going very well at the moment, Roger, and a very happy America is back in the space business, the manned space business. A historic day for America. This is Reg Turnhill for News Round from Cape Canaveral. Goodbye.
Thank you, Roger. It's all happening today on Children's BBC, isn't it, eh?
I look incredibly busy there. Is it tea time, lunchtime, breakfast? What is it?
Girls once again made a safe and successful blast off from Cape Canaveral in America. Discovery's launch is a great birthday present for NASA, the American government group that organises nearly all America's space work. And like Blue Peter, NASA is 30 years old in October.
This shiny metal ball is what brought about the birth of NASA. It's a replica of Sputnik 1, the first satellite launched by Russia in 1957. America's military men were flabbergasted and terrified by Russia putting anything, even this simple ball, into space. Would Russian missiles soon be raining down on America from space, perhaps launched from the moon? Not if they could help it. The American president, John Kennedy, was determined America would win the space race.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
The rocket engineers and space scientists of NASA were delighted with that speech. For the next few years, all the money they wanted was poured into NASA to get Americans to the moon. A succession of bigger and better rockets were built, leading to the mighty Saturn V, twice the size of the Shuttle, and more new achievements were clocked up in space. And along the way to the moon, the whole world learned something about itself in moments like this one, perhaps the most moving in NASA's 30-year history. On Christmas Eve 20 years ago, Apollo 8 circled the moon, the first manned craft to do so. Astronaut Frank Borman spoke to the whole world with this message.
In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And God said, "Let there be light." God saw that it was good. And from the crew of Apollo 8, we close with good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you on the good Earth.
It was that message from those astronauts sent as they looked back through 250,000 miles of space to the tiny blue sphere of spacecraft Earth, which first made us realise what a fragile little planet we live on, and just how beautiful it is, and how essential it is to work much harder to take care of it. One of the proudest moments in NASA's history was the moon landing itself in July 1969. As Neil Armstrong stepped onto the lunar surface, he said those famous words, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." And that it had been an incredible leap for NASA. They started work only 11 years before, at a time when nobody knew if humans could even go into space and return to Earth alive. In all, 6 crafts and 12 astronauts reached the moon and explored parts of it and brought small bits back for study. And here in the studio, very much on Earth, is a bit of the moon. It's been lent to us by the Natural History Museum, and it's been set in a glass ball, if you can see there. It just looks like a piece of coal, but it's got a lot of sparkly bits in there. But by the later moon flights, NASA's brilliant success impressed fewer Americans. More argued against the huge cost of the space program, and the politicians took away much of NASA's money, cancelling 3 final moon landings. So NASA looked for a new project, a new goal. Rockets like the Saturn V were very expensive and could only be used once. They hit on the idea of a reusable space plane, the Shuttle. The Shuttle has worked, it has launched satellites and can be returned to Earth and used again. But its building was a nightmare. It was delayed time after time. It's certain that NASA will never achieve its aim of 40 launches a year. And all the problems with the Shuttle have meant NASA has only been able to launch astronauts into space for 5 of the last 13 years. Each setback loses NASA more of its friends in the American government. It's amazing how quickly successes are forgotten, and there have been many besides the moon landings. NASA has sent or is sending probes to all but one of the 8 planets that circle the Sun. It was a marvellous moment when the Voyager probe sent back the first close-ups of pictures of Saturn and its rings, and of Jupiter, the largest planet in the solar system, which was also discovered to have had rings. Next year, Voyager reaches Neptune, which will be seen clearly on Earth for the first time. And as NASA's experts have developed their machines, computers and guidance systems, a wealth of discoveries and inventions have been made which can benefit here on Earth. This non-stick pan frying This frying pan here is the most common example of an object with roots in space research, but there are hundreds of others. Microtechnology is saving lives, and this tiny pacemaker inserted into sick patients keeps the heart beating. This wheelchair was only developed after NASA had produced a special lightweight alloy for their Apollo rockets. And these sunglasses have special filters that protect the eye from bright light and ultraviolet rays, just like the visor of a spacesuit. And this water filter was developed from the ones used on space shuttles. All these and many other items were invented because of the space program. But critics of NASA have always claimed money spent on space travel could have been better used solving problems here on Earth. And the critics are gaining ground. At only one time during the race to the moon have the politicians who provide NASA's money and the research scientists and engineers who do the work shared the same target. Since then, it's been much harder for NASA. If the planned space station is delayed, plenty of people will be calling for it to be scrapped. On the line now, via the Bright Star satellite, another space spin-off live from today's successful launch is Newsround space editor Reg Turnill. Hello, Reg.
Hello, Yvette.
Will today's launch help NASA?
Oh, immensely. But it's only one small step yet. They've got to launch a huge communication satellite in the next few hours. They've got to make a landing at Edwards next Monday. Until all these things have been done perfectly, the politicians still won't be happy.
What will NASA do in the next 30 years?
Well, Yvette, that'll take us, won't it, to 2018. And John Glenn, America's first man in space, told me just a few minutes ago he thought they ought to be ready for a big expedition to Mars just around that time. But first, NASA must make the shuttle stay in orbit much longer than it can now. They must build that space station, and then they must make a manned base on the moon, and then get ready for the Martian expedition.
The scientists who want to probe further into the universe, will they get their way?
Well, I think they will, because as you were saying earlier, we're all worried about the future of spacecraft Earth, and I don't think there's any doubt that sooner or later, in a few hundred years' time, not tomorrow, man will have to think about colonizing not only the solar system, but moving further out into the universe.
Reg, what's the latest news on the shuttle?
Well, my latest news is it's pouring with rain. Thank goodness it didn't earlier because it couldn't have launched. But all is well in orbit. It's well into the first orbit around the Earth. Everybody seems very happy and relieved.
Well, Reg, we're looking forward to watching the progress of the shuttle. Thank you very much indeed.
We'll be back on Monday. You can see me at an American camp.
And I'll have to talk very quickly indeed, telling you all about a brand new competition. So, we'll see you on Monday.
Bye.
Have a good weekend. Ta-da.
The news at 5:45 with Fiona Armstrong.
America is back in space as Discovery blasts off from the Cape. Piper Alpha disaster probably started in a gas compressor. Ashdown tells the Democrats we're marching to power. And shattered dreams for Daley Thompson at the Olympics. Good evening. The American space dream was put back on target at 4:37 this afternoon when the shuttle Discovery blasted off from Cape Canaveral for a 4-day flight. Weather problems delayed the mission for more than an hour and a half before the NASA commentator was able to say America has returned to space.
T-minus 3 minutes, 30 seconds. All three engines now being moved in a pattern.
After a morning of delays caused by troublesome high-altitude winds, Launch Director Bob Crippen gave the final order to go. Discovery was on her way.
13, 12, 11, 10. We'll go for main engine start. 7, 6. Start. 3, 2, 1, 0. And liftoff. Liftoff. Americans return to space as Discovery clears the tower.
Roger roll, Discovery. Crew confirms roll program. Houston now controlling.
So far so good, but everyone was waiting for the critical moment when the Challenger accident had happened.
Discovery, go at throttle up.
Roger, go.
Discovery given a go at throttle up, 3 engines at 104.
But this time, the huge white solid rocket boosters performed flawlessly before spending their fuel and being discarded safely. Discovery was on its way to orbit. President Reagan addressed the nation. On every strip of land and beach around the launch site, up to 1 million people had waited before dawn to watch the launch. Kept at least 10 miles away, they'd watched on portable TV sets as Captain Rick Hawke and his crew had walked out heading for the orbiter early this morning. Despite the tension, the commander could afford a moment of humor as a crewman handed him a false nose. But as the hours wore on, the tension became evident. Pinky Nelson sitting in the doorway, waiting for the word that they could go. Eventually it came, but not before a good deal of confusion.
We're anticipating the clock will hold at T-minus 31 seconds due to a failure. We have not heard what that is yet.
That's correct, MTD.
We will not stop the clock. The orbiter...
But here at Cape Canaveral, NASA are confident that they're now on their way to a successful mission. America is back into manned spaceflight, and they've got those images. They're going to remember this takeoff for a long time.
Space as Discovery clears the tower.
Ken Reese, ITN, Cape Canaveral.
A short time ago, Mr. Reagan spoke about the launch from the White House, and this is what he said.
I tell you that at 11:37, the Space Shuttle Discovery lifted off at the Kennedy Space Center. And is now headed into orbit, and America is back in space.
There are reports just in from Seoul tonight that 2 British athletes have had drugs tests which have proved positive. There are no more details at present.
The 6 o'clock news from the BBC with Nicholas Witchell and Philip Hayton.
Good evening. The headlines at 6 o'clock. American astronauts are back in space.
0 and liftoff. Liftoff. Americans return to space.
A flawless launch for the shuttle Discovery. Tonight, she and her crew are safely in orbit. Here, the launch of a new leader with a new message. Paddy Ashdown's vision of power for the Democrats. America held its breath this afternoon to watch a large white craft called Discovery lift off and climb into space. There were said to be 500,000 people lining the roads around Cape Canaveral. Many of them had been there 32 months ago, where they'd witnessed the tragedy of the Shuttle Challenger. That day was cold and ended in despair. Today the weather was good, too good in fact for a time. The winds were too light. The launch had to be delayed for nearly 2 hours. Finally, at 4:37 London time this afternoon, the Shuttle Discovery blasted off, and this time the launch was flawless. Tonight, American astronauts are back in space. There, they say, in memory of the 7 colleagues who were lost aboard Challenger.
Covey, Mike Lowndes, Dave Chalmers and Pinky Nelson.
Early morning at Cape Canaveral, and the 5 astronauts were on their way. The future of the manned space program riding with them. The astronaut convoy rolled out along the Florida swamps with one more delay hanging over it. For once, the weather in the upper atmosphere was too good. The shuttle computers had expected worse. But the conditions improved, and just before launch, mission controllers wished the astronauts good luck and Godspeed, a message from the people of America.
Go for a main engine start. 7, 6, we have main engine start. 3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff! Liftoff. Americans return to space as Discovery clears the tower.
Roger roll, Discovery. Crew confirms roll program. Houston now controlling.
Heads down, they sped out over the Atlantic, aiming for a maximum velocity of 17,500 miles an hour. 73 seconds into the flight, they crossed what NASA officials had called the psychological barrier, the point where Challenger had failed.
Discovery, go at throttle up.
Go.
Discovery given a go at throttle up, 3 engines at 104%. Velocity 3,200 feet per second, altitude 10.8 nautical miles, downrange distance 8 nautical miles.
It was a spectacular start to a 4-day mission after a grounding of 2 3/4 years. The much modified shuttle soaring upward, an effort to regain US prestige and power.
Well, it was great. I'm just glad to see us get going again. It's important not only from a support for the space station aspect, but now means we can get on to doing the research that the space program is supposed to be doing, and I'm just glad to see this go off successfully today.
Discovery has now reached orbit 180 miles high, leaving much joy and not a little relief back on Earth. This is Tim Sebastian for the 6 o'clock news at Cape Canaveral.
President Reagan was watching it all at the White House, and afterwards he couldn't conceal his delight when he delivered this message for America and the world.
America is back in space. We're now looking forward to the successful completion of the Discovery mission and the safe return of her 5-member crew. We salute the bravery of Rick Hawk, Dick Covey, Pinky Nelson, Mike Lounge, and Dave Hilmers, and we ask God to bless this important voyage.
And joining us live from Cape Canaveral now is our correspondent, Tim Sebastian. Tim, the newsroom here in London fell very silent this afternoon to watch those television pictures. You were there in person. Just what was the atmosphere like?
It was absolutely electric here. For the first time in 32 months, America was trying to get back into space. It had a new manned mission, and they were very, very silent in the control room. In the last 48 hours, they've been building up to this, thinking that the whole manned space program depended on it. It was very silent, very quiet, but afterwards they were throwing up their hands in joy.
Outwardly, Discovery looks the same as Challenger, but of course, inside it's quite different. There have been a number of new safety measures built in, haven't there?
There have been a tremendous amount of changes, approximately 200 to the orbiter craft itself, about 150 to the solid rocket boosters, which contributed to the Challenger disaster. Now, the bill for this accident is getting on for $20,000 million. This mission really had to succeed.
So, Tim, what is happening now? Discovery is in space and she will remain there for 4 days, I think.
Discovery is going about its normal task. This is very nice to see for the launch controllers here, the people of NASA who've worked so hard to bring this about. What they are going to do, the main point of this mission, is to put into orbit a tracking and data relay satellite, a carbon copy of the one which was lost in Challenger. There'll also be a variety of scientific experiments, and they're just going to make a start on the enormous backlog of work that has been lost for the last 32 months.
Tim Sebastian at Cape Canaveral with everything, as they say, looking good. Thank you. The Shuttle Discovery is carrying much more than American pride and self-confidence. In the 32 months that American astronauts have been grounded, the country's space program has fallen behind, while the Soviets have succeeded. Major science projects have had to be postponed. Now, Discovery hopes to make up the lost ground.
Today's successful launch of the Space Shuttle means America can now plan realistically for several major projects over the next few years. NASA plans 1 more shuttle launch this year and 7 next year. Half the launches will be to put military satellites into orbit, but there will also be 2 key scientific satellites. One, known as Magellan, is due for launch next April. This satellite is the first of 4 which will map the surface of Venus, hidden beneath dense clouds. Then in October next year, the Galileo spacecraft will be launched to Jupiter. The satellite will take 6 years to get there by a circuitous route. Once there, it will release a probe which will descend into the atmosphere of Jupiter and send back information for just 75 minutes before being destroyed by the pressure. The launch of the huge Hubble Space Telescope has now been pushed back to 1990. It has cost nearly £1 billion and will be able to detect objects 50 times fainter than can be seen with the most powerful telescopes on Earth. The Soviet Union shook the American space establishment 2 years ago with the launch of their giant Energia rocket. It can carry 3 times the payload of the shuttle, and when fully developed it may carry 6 or 7 times the payload. It's thought to be partially reusable. Some believe over the next 40 years the Soviet Union will use up to 1,000 of these rockets. So America is now looking again at heavy lift rockets, partly because they will be needed to launch any Star Wars hardware for the Strategic Defense Initiative, and partly to bring down the cost of launching satellites. The Space Shuttle may be back on course, but it's a fragile tool to be reserved for special missions which can't be flown on conventional rockets.
When the Shuttle Discovery, carrying 5 astronauts, was successfully launched at Cape Canaveral. It's America's first manned space mission since the Challenger disaster. Liftoff was delayed 98 minutes because of winds, but finally went off smoothly. Our Washington correspondent, Edward Sturton, reports.
This is Shuttle Launch Control. The test team and orbiter are ready to support the flight crew's departure.
It is a familiar sight. It used to be an almost routine procedure. But the Challenger disaster and the 32 months of soul-searching that followed it meant that America's attention was focused on today's launch.
The launch team leaving the suiting room now.
The crew is the most experienced ever to fly in a shuttle. All have been in space before. There's only one civilian among them. They were driven to the launch pad past a memorial to America's past glories in space, a Saturn V of the type that took the first men to the moon.
This will be Commander Houck's third space flight aboard the shuttle.
The shuttle commander, Captain Frederick Hawk, sought to relieve some of the tension as he climbed aboard. But for NASA, and for the thousands of people who came to watch the launch, America's future in space was at stake. The shuttle is carrying a satellite similar to the one that was destroyed aboard the Challenger, but its real mission is to restore the pride that was lost in the Challenger disaster and to prove that America can fly safely in space. And safety concerns were put before all others. The checks were more meticulous than ever.
CAFM verified, COOS. COOS verified. CHYD. CHYD verified. CATU. CATU verified.
Concern about high-altitude wind conditions forced a delay, and for a while there was doubt about whether the launch would go ahead today.
Control, Houston.
But 98 minutes late, the final countdown began.
10, we're go for main engine start. 7, 6, we have main engine start. 3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff! Liftoff. Americans return to space as Discovery clears the tower.
There was an echo of the final words that Mission Control spoke to the Challenger crew.
Discovery, go at throttle up.
Go. And Discovery was safely on her way.
Standing by for solid rocket booster separation. Solid rocket boosters have separated.
The sentiment was the same at the White House.
And it's now headed into orbit, and America is back in space.
And at NASA.
Well, to start with, wow.
Edward Sturton, ITN, Washington.
And there we take a break.
To the memory of their 7 3 years ago. Uncertain weather delayed the launch for 1.5 hours, but after almost 3 years, American astronauts are back in space.
Cubby, Mike Lang, Dave Somers, and Pinky Nelson.
Early morning at Cape Canaveral, and the 5 astronauts were on their way. The future of the manned space program riding with them. The astronaut convoy rolled out along the Florida swamps, with one more delay hanging over it. For once the weather in the upper atmosphere was too good, the shuttle computers had expected worse. But the conditions improved, and just before launch, mission controllers wished the astronauts good luck and Godspeed. A message from the people of America.
Go for main engine start. 7, 6, we have main engine start. 3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff! Liftoff. Americans return to space as Discovery clears the tower.
Roger roll, Discovery.
Crew confirms roll program, Houston now controlling.
Heads down, they sped out over the Atlantic, aiming for a maximum velocity of 17,500 miles an hour. 73 seconds into the flight, they crossed what NASA officials had called the psychological barrier, the point where Challenger had failed.
Discovery, go at throttle up.
Roger, go. Discovery given a go at throttle up. 3 engines at 104%. Velocity 3,200 feet per second. Altitude 10.8 nautical miles. Downrange distance 8 nautical miles.
It was a spectacular start to a 4-day mission after a grounding of 2 3/4 years. The much-modified shuttle soaring upward, an effort to regain U.S. prestige and power.
Well, it was great. I'm just glad to see us get going again. It's important not only from a support for the space station aspect, but now means we can get on to doing the research that the space program is supposed to be doing, and I'm just glad to see this go off successfully today.
Discovery reached its orbit 180 miles high and opened its cargo doors. Inside, the tracking and data relay satellite that replaces the one lost on Challenger. By tonight, the orbiter was circling the globe every 90 minutes, leaving much joy and considerable relief back on Earth. This was more than just the launch of a shuttle. It was the relaunch of the US manned space program. Tonight, NASA is back in business and America's dented pride well on the way to being restored. This is Tim Sebastian for the 9 o'clock news at Cape Canaveral.
The Soviet Union today released the first pictures of its new space shuttle. The news agency TASS said its first launch would be on an unmanned mission to test its design and systems.
To start each of the 3 APUs.
The shuttle may have stolen the headlines, but the Soviet Union was determined not to be left out. And this evening it released pictures of its own version of the shuttle. And as expected, it's remarkably like the American one. It's due to be launched possibly before the end of the year on the back of the massive new Soviet rocket Energia, which flew for the first time last year. The shuttle will be unmanned. Today, Western experts were intrigued by their first glimpse of the Russian shuttle and of the timing of the release of the pictures.
The Soviets always learn from the Americans' mistakes, and it's rather an interesting fact that this vehicle is probably began its design at about the time the American shuttle's design was frozen. But I would say it's more a case of parallel evolution rather than actual straight copying.
And how does it differ from the American one?
It differs in the fact that the main propulsion is not on the shuttle vehicle itself, it's on the core, which is recoverable. So it should make the shuttle vehicle probably lighter and more manoeuvrable.
Today's successful launch means that America can now start to catch up on space plans shelved for more than 2 years. America has always launched far fewer satellites than the Soviet Union, and more sophisticated ones. But last year, America launched just 8 satellites. Problems with the shuttle and its other rockets had left it embarrassingly naked on the launch pad. In the same year, the Soviet Union launched 95. Today's tantalizing glimpse of the Russian shuttle has given the Americans a surprise. It has also given even greater impetus to the competition to be preeminent in space.
To the Challenger disaster. The atmosphere at Cape Canaveral was tense after unusual weather conditions delayed liftoff by an hour and a half. The launch was originally set for 1 minute to 3. It was rescheduled for an hour later because of peculiarly light winds, but that also had to be cancelled. Less than a minute and a half before blastoff, NASA announced another problem which would hold the launch. But seconds later, they ordered it to proceed. Discovery was launched at 37 minutes past 4.
We're anticipating the clock will hold at T-minus 31 seconds due to a failure. We have not...
There was confusion in the final moments, computers on board sensing an air pressure problem in the crew cabin. But NASA managers had anticipated the problem, decided to override it, and ordered a go for launch.
And if we clear, we will not stop at 31. Is that true? That's correct, MTD.
We will not stop the clock.
The countdown continued, Discovery lifting America back into space after 2.5 years.
3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff! Liftoff. Americans return to space as Discovery clears the tower.
Roger roll, Discovery.
Down below, crowding every possible vantage point, an estimated 1 million people who'd come to see the launch in person. But everyone was waiting for that critical moment, the moment when Challenger had exploded.
Discovery, go at throttle up. Roger, go.
Discovery given a go at throttle up. 3 engines at
The moment passed, Discovery was on its way. Some independent observers claimed to notice what appeared to be a spurt of flame from one solid rocket booster, but NASA say that so far all their data shows a normal operation. It was, of course, the failure of such a booster that led to the Challenger disaster. Their fuel spent, the huge rocket casings fell away. Discovery was heading for its first orbit.
3 engines still running 104%.
I couldn't stop thinking about the Challenger, and I'm so happy that it's all great.
Absolutely superb. An extra bonus to the holiday, I would say.
And that Discovery that hit it off is super. That's right.
And President Reagan addressed the nation.
11:37. The Space Shuttle Discovery lifted off at the Kennedy Space Center. And it's now headed into orbit, and America is back in space.
Early this morning, to the cheers of their colleagues, Commander Rick Hawke and his crew had walked out to board the orbiter, charged with leading America back into space. It had been a morning of frustrating delays, Rick Hawke trying to ease the tension with some impromptu humour. Pinky Nelson showing the strain of the long wait. But they did get away, and NASA Director James Fletcher was speechless.
Wow! All I can say is that the nation owes you a lot.
The first pictures have arrived from space showing the payload bay on the orbiter and its satellite cargo.
And liftoff!
But this is the image that everyone's going to carry away from this day, that perfect launch of the Shuttle Discovery.
Crew confirms roll program.
And you join us here live at Cape Canaveral, where everybody's very, very happy tonight. This place that's made so much of our modern history has made a little more today. It's as though a national nightmare has ended. For the men of NASA in particular, it's a tremendous boost to their morale and self-confidence, and to millions of ordinary Americans, as if a symbol of national pride has been restored. They've still got to return safely, but America is back in space tonight. Ken Reese, News at 10, Cape Canaveral.
At about the same time as NASA launched Discovery this afternoon, the Soviets released the first color pictures of their secret shuttle, which looks very similar to the American craft. The Soviet shuttle has been under development since 1982, but has never been shown to the Soviet public.
Tonight's Moscow television news bulletin showed the first pictures ever of the Russians' new shuttle, and it looked remarkably like America's. Actually, there's quite a difference. The power is provided not by the shuttle's own engines, but by the rocket that carries it, Energia. And Energia can also transport into space a payload 10 times as heavy as the shuttle's own cargo. The Russians say they hope to launch it this year. Americans, meanwhile, were probably too busy celebrating their own success to take much notice of this little Soviet dig at them. Their shuttle, Discovery, had restored the nation's pride after the Challenger disaster of 2.5 years ago. Tim Sebastian watched the Americans relaunch themselves into space at Cape Canaveral.
3 hours after launch, Discovery transmitted its first television pictures as the celebrations got underway on Earth. It was testing the tracking and data relay satellite that lifted out of its cargo bay within the last half hour. The second mission objective was completed, and the new shuttle is earning its stripes. Not only did NASA have to launch a shuttle, it had 1 million visitors to manage. Americans anxious to see honor restored and tax dollars well spent. The country was holding its breath.
Cubby, Mike Lang, Dave Somers, and Pinky Nelson, followed by...
At 7 this morning, the 5 astronauts emerged, but uncertain as to whether they'd fly. Their convoy headed out through the Florida Everglades as NASA tried to explain the problem. The higher altitude winds were too light. The shuttle computers were not programmed to expect it. NASA held the count.
This is Shuttle Launch Control at T-minus 3 hours and holding. We cannot launch today if the winds do not change either in direction and wind speed.
The doubts lasted 2 hours, then conditions improved. NASA controllers were heard to wish the astronauts good luck and Godspeed. They were cleared for launch.
Go for main engine start, 7, 6, start, 3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff! Liftoff. Americans return to space as Discovery clears the tower.
Roger, roll, Discovery. Crew confirms roll program. Houston now controlling.
Heads down, they sped out over the Atlantic, aiming for a maximum velocity of 17,500 miles an hour. 73 seconds into the flight, they crossed what NASA officials had called the psychological barrier, the point where Challenger had failed.
Discovery, go at throttle up. Discovery given a go at throttle up. 3 engines at 104%. Velocity 3,200 feet per second. Altitude 10.8 nautical miles. Downrange distance 8 nautical miles.
From From across America, high praise for NASA. From NASA, high praise for itself.
What you have to really understand is that for the past 2.5 years, there have been literally tens of thousands of people everywhere in this United States working on that team to make happen what happened today. And I'll tell you, it is a great feeling to be a part of a team when you can do what we did today. And I'm just pleased to be a part of that team, and I'm just delighted to be here with you today. And most of all, I'm very proud to be an American.
Oh, I think there's a great collective sigh of relief in the United States seeing that shuttle take off and move out into orbit.
I'm just glad to see us get going again. It's important not only from a support for the space station aspect, but now means we can get on to doing the research that the space program is supposed to be doing, and I'm just glad to see this go off successfully today.
For the first time in 32 months, the launch pad here has functioned as a launch pad. Discovery is now 160 miles up and due to stay there till Monday. It's the road to recovery, but a long road.
Tim Sebastian, in Cape Canaveral, has the launch of that satellite, Tim, more or less completed the actual concrete achievements of this trip?
Well, it was the most important thing that NASA wanted to do, unless you count actually getting Discovery up into orbit in the first place. But remember, the important thing about this flight is it's a test flight. We're looking at 200-300 modifications that have actually been made to the shuttle and the booster rockets. This is the first time that these will have been flight tested. NASA is going to look in detail at the telemetry, at the recordings later, to see how they've stood up to the battering of this kind of flight. So very much an experimental flight. So much was resting on it, so many hopes, so many aspirations as far as America is concerned. They want to see whether this shuttle has finally been put right.
But Tim, what about the broader question of the shuttle program? Do you think it's been fully reprieved? Are there still a great number of doubts about the sense of the shuttle program?
I think there are, and I think these are going to be inevitable. What we've seen since the Challenger disaster is a lot of soul-searching about the role of the shuttle in future, particularly by the military. Interestingly enough, since the Challenger disaster, they have diversified. They no longer put their faith in a single system. They are going to be using new heavy rockets to put their payloads into space. They already are. And the question is going to be asked, once the space station is built, and this is the primary function of the shuttle, what are we going to do with this vehicle then? What do we actually need it for? It's the most expensive piece of hardware that America possesses. What are we actually going to do with it? And those questions remain.
And in the year ahead, how many shuttle launches can we expect?
Well, we're never going to get back to the heady days when people planned it as a sort of a way-day vehicle twice a month. What they're looking at is a maximum of 12, one every month, for a year. After that, they're going to look at the shuttle in detail and see what its role is going to be. But the shuttle is on track tonight. I think we can say that. I think NASA is back in business. After all, the company was bet on the success of this launch. And I think we're going to see NASA looking for some more specific results and not going back into the commercial business, but obviously looking for more scientific experiments that can be conducted in space. And I gather there's quite a choice on offer.
And Tim, as we see the evening setting in behind you there, great celebrations expected tonight?
Great celebrations, but I think NASA has learned an important lesson. Even when they were building themselves up to this flight, they were saying, you can never rely on the safety of these missions. Sooner or later, there will be another accident, so they are chastened people. Never again will the Americans or NASA regard this kind of space flight as routine. I think that's the lesson of Challenger. I think it's a lesson they're going to keep in their minds through the flights of the space shuttle to come.
Thank you, Tim Sebastian. Good night. And the headlines in tomorrow morning's papers. And most of them are concerned with the news from Seoul that 2 British competitors in the Olympics have been found positive after drug tests. Daily Telegraph as well, Olympic drugs test is failed by 2 Britons. The Times, 2 Britons failed drug tests at the Olympics. A picture here in the centre of the Times front page of Discovery taking off. Discovery ends the months of doubt for NASA. The Financial Times has safety lapses causing the Piper Alpha disaster. North Sea oil firms, echoed here by The Guardian, warned on safety. Daily Express, back to the news from Seoul. Olympic drugs test, Britain's failed drugs check. The Daily Mail, The Sun, 2 Brits fail drug tests. And the Morning Star has the news that the GCHQ union members who've been asked to give up their membership or to go and strikes, says the Morning Star, will be called to defend the 18. Well, that's all from Newsnight tonight. Back tomorrow at 10:45. But for the moment, from myself and all of us on Newsnight, a very good night. The night America returned to space.